Granddad always said, "When the wild comes calling, you better answer." I just never thought it would be this desperate. Sarah Whitehorse froze, coffee mug halfway to her lips, as the scratching at her cabin door grew more frantic. Through the Tennessee mountain mist, she glimpsed amber eyes reflecting the porch light, a bobcat, larger than any she'd photographed in these Smoky Mountain foothills. But this wasn't a casual visit. The wild cat held something in her powerful jaws, a limp, spotted bundle barely bigger than Sarah's fist. A kitten. The mother's eyes locked onto Sarah's through the window glass, pupils dilated with desperate intelligence that made Sarah's chest tighten. The scratching stopped. Silence stretched between them like a held breath. Then the bobcat did something that defied every wildlife manual Sarah had ever read. She gently placed the motionless kitten on the wooden planks and stepped back, amber gaze never wavering from Sarah's face. A plea, a prayer, a trust. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The jungle pressed in around Private Joseph Whitehorse like a living thing. Humid air, thick with the scent of rotting vegetation and distant smoke. At 22, the Cherokee soldier moved with the quiet confidence his grandfather had taught him in the Tennessee mountains, every step deliberate, every sound catalogued. "Whitehorse, you hear that?" Sergeant Martinez whispered, his voice barely audible over the constant drip of monsoon rain from the canopy above. Joseph tilted his head, filtering through the symphony of jungle sounds. There, beneath the chatter of monkeys and the distant rumble of artillery, a soft whimpering, almost human but not quite. "Something's hurt, Sarge. Could be a trap. Charlie's been using wounded civilians as bait." But Joseph was already moving toward the sound, his M16 ready but not aimed. In a small clearing ahead, partially hidden beneath a fallen palm frond, he found her. The leopard cub couldn't have been more than 6 months old, her golden coat matted with blood from a shrapnel wound across her shoulder. Dark eyes, clouded with pain and fever, tracked his approach. She should have been terrified of humans, should have snarled or fled. Instead, she lay still, watching him with an intelligence that made his breath catch. "Jesus, Whitehorse, what the hell are you doing?" Martinez had caught up, staring in disbelief as Joseph knelt beside the wounded animal. "She's just a baby, Sarge. She's a goddamn predator that'll tear your throat out when she's grown." Joseph ignored him, slowly extending his hand. The cub sniffed cautiously, then pressed her small head against his palm. The trust in that simple gesture hit him harder than any mortar round. "Back home, Cherokee taught us all creatures are family," Joseph murmured, already shrugging off his pack to find his first aid kit. "My grandfather would say she's a gift from the spirits." "Your grandfather ain't here in this hellhole." But Joseph was already cleaning the wound, speaking softly in Cherokee as the cub trembled under his gentle touch. "Easy now, little one, easy." Martinez shook his head. "You're crazy. You know that command finds out you're keeping a pet. They'll have your stripes." Joseph wrapped the wound with careful precision, the same way he'd bandaged his younger sister's scraped knees back in Tennessee. The cub, he found himself thinking of her as Luna, for her pale markings relaxed under his ministrations. "She saved herself by trusting me," Joseph said quietly. "Least I can do is return the favor." As they prepared to move out, Luna struggled to her feet and followed, staying close to Joseph's heels like she'd been doing it her whole life. Martinez muttered curses about regulations and court-martials, but Joseph felt something shift in his chest, a connection that transcended species, deeper than words. He had no idea this moment would echo across generations. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the cabin door, every wildlife protocol screaming at her to stay back, to call the authorities, to let nature take its course. But the bobcat mother, she found herself thinking of her as Spirit simply sat on her haunches. Amber eyes fixed on Sarah's face with an intensity that made her heart race. The kitten lay motionless on the weathered planks, its tiny chest barely rising and falling. Sarah could see it was male, probably 8 weeks old, with the distinctive tufted ears and spotted coat that marked him as pure mountain bobcat. But something was terribly wrong. His breathing was shallow, labored, and when Sarah knelt down, she caught the acrid smell of sickness. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, not sure if she was talking to the mother or the kit. "What happened to you?" Spirit made a sound Sarah had never heard before, a low, throaty call that seemed to vibrate through her bones. Not threatening but urgent, desperate. The big cat's muscles were coiled with tension, but she made no move to attack or flee. Instead, she watched as Sarah carefully lifted the kitten, her amber eyes tracking every movement. The little one's body was hot with fever, and Sarah's heart sank as she felt the rapid, thready pulse. Whatever was wrong, it was serious. She cradled him against her chest, feeling his tiny claws reflexively grip her flannel shirt. "I need to call Dr. Martinez," she murmured, backing slowly toward the door. To her amazement, Spirit followed, padding silently onto the porch and settling near the doorframe like a sentinel inside the cabin. Sarah grabbed her phone with one hand while supporting the kitten with the other. Doctor. Elena Martinez had been the only wildlife veterinarian in a 3-county radius for 15 years, and Sarah had worked with her before on injured birds and orphaned deer. "Elena, it's Sarah Whitehorse. I have an emergency. A bobcat kitten, looks about 8 weeks old, high fever, difficulty breathing." "Sarah, you know I have to ask, how did you come by a bobcat kitten?" Through the window, Sarah watched Spirit's silhouette against the morning light. "His mother brought him to me." A pause. "I'm sorry. Did you say the mother brought him?" "She's sitting on my porch right now." "Elena, I've never seen anything like this. She carried him here, laid him down, and just waited, like she knows I can help. That's not typical bobcat behavior. Sarah, they're intensely protective of their young. Are you sure you're safe?" Sarah looked out at Spirit, who had settled into a sphinx-like position facing the door. "I'm sure. There's something different about this one. Can you come? I'll be there in 45 minutes. Keep the kitten warm and quiet. And Sarah, don't leave that mother alone with her baby for long. This level of trust is extraordinary, but it's also fragile." While waiting, Sarah prepared a makeshift nest in a laundry basket, lining it with soft towels. The kitten, she decided to call him Little Thunder, after the way his tiny purr rumbled like distant storms, barely stirred when she settled him in the warmth. She stepped back onto the porch, and Spirit immediately looked up, those intelligent eyes searching Sarah's face as if trying to read her intentions. "He's very sick," Sarah said softly, knowing the words meant nothing to the wildcat, but needing to say them anyway. But Dr. Martinez is coming. She's helped lots of animals. Spirit's ears twitched at the sound of her voice. Slowly, deliberately. The bobcat rose and padded to the window, pressing her nose against the glass where she could see Little Thunder's basket. The vigil began. For the next hour, Sarah found herself in the strangest standoff of her life. She worked quietly inside, checking on Little Thunder every few minutes and preparing for the vet's arrival, while Spirit maintained her watch outside. Whenever Sarah approached the window, the bobcat's gaze would find hers, and Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a mantle. This wasn't just about one sick kitten. This was about trust given across species lines, about a covenant forged in desperation and hope. When Dr. T. Martinez's white pickup finally rumbled up the gravel drive, Spirit's head snapped up, every muscle tensing, but she didn't flee. Instead, she moved to position herself between the approaching vehicle and the cabin, a living barrier protecting her young. Elena Martinez stepped out slowly, her weathered face creased with concern as she took in the scene. "Sweet Jesus," she breathed. "I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've never—" "She won't leave," Sarah called from the porch. "I think she understands we're trying to help." Elena approached with careful, measured steps, her veterinary bag in one hand. Spirit's lips pulled back slightly, revealing impressive canine teeth, but she didn't growl or retreat. "Easy, Mama," Elena murmured in the same tone she used with frightened domestic cats. "We're here to help your baby." Inside, Elena's examination was swift but thorough. Her face grew increasingly grave as she checked Little Thunder's vital signs, examined his gums, and listened to his labored breathing. "This isn't just illness," she said finally, pulling Sarah aside. "I'm seeing signs of poisoning, something environmental, possibly chemical runoff or contaminated water. Have you noticed other wildlife acting strangely?" Sarah's mind raced. "Now that you mention it, I found a dead raccoon family by the creek last week, and the bird activity at my feeders has dropped off dramatically. We need to get him to my clinic for blood work and IV fluids." "But Sarah, if this is environmental poisoning, that kitten might not be the only victim, and if there's a source contaminating the watershed." Through the window, they watched Spirit pace restlessly, her maternal instincts clearly in conflict with her wild nature. The trust she'd shown was unprecedented, but it was also heartbreaking, a mother's desperation overriding millions of years of evolutionary caution. She brought him to the only place she thought could help, Sarah realized aloud. Somehow, she knows this cabin means safety. Elena nodded grimly. "The question is, how? And what else do you think she knows that we don't?" As they prepared to transport Little Thunder to the clinic, Sarah caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. On the horizon, barely visible through the tree line, smokestacks rose from the Blackstone Industries facility that had opened 6 months ago, promising jobs and prosperity for the region. The pieces were starting to fit together, and Sarah didn't like the picture they were forming. The ambush came at dawn, when the mist still clung to the jungle floor like smoke from yesterday's battles. Joseph had been teaching Luna to stay low when the shooting started, her golden coat nearly invisible against the fallen leaves he'd carefully arranged around their position. "Contact front!" Sergeant Martinez screamed, his voice barely audible over the sudden eruption of AK-47 fire that shredded the vegetation around them. Joseph rolled behind a massive mahogany trunk. Luna pressed tight against his side, her small body trembling, but her dark eyes alert and trusting. She'd learned, over the past 3 weeks, to read his signals. A raised hand meant freeze, a low whistle meant follow, and the tension in his muscles now meant danger. The firefight was brutal and chaotic. Charlie had set up a perfect L-shaped ambush, catching their patrol in a deadly crossfire that sent bullets snapping through the air like angry hornets. Joseph could hear his buddies calling for covering fire, could see muzzle flashes winking through the green hell that surrounded them. "We're pinned down," radioed Corporal Jackson from somewhere to their left. "They got us from 2 sides. Joseph's mind raced, cataloging the enemy positions by their muzzle flashes. There are 2 shooters in a spider hole 30 meters ahead, another in the canopy, picking off anyone who showed movement. A machine gun nest to the right, its barrel sweeping back and forth like the head of a hunting snake. Luna's claws dug into his arm as another burst of fire sent bark flying from their cover. She was scared, but staying put, trusting him to keep them alive. Joseph had seen grown men break under less pressure, but this 6-month-old leopard cub was holding steady. "White Horse!" Martinez's voice cracked with strain. "Can you see a way out of this shit?" Joseph studied the terrain with the eyes his grandfather had trained on Tennessee mountainsides. Every hunter knew the secret wasn't just seeing what was there, but understanding what wasn't. The enemy fire pattern showed gaps, brief moments when certain angles went uncovered. "There's a ravine 30 meters northeast," he called back. "But we'd have to cross open ground to reach it. That's suicide, son." But Joseph was already moving, scooping Luna into his arms and sprinting for a fallen log that would give them better cover. The leopard cub pressed against his chest, her rapid heartbeat matching his own as bullets cracked overhead. From their new position, Joseph could see what the others couldn't, a depression in the ground. Probably an old bomb crater that would provide covered movement toward their escape route. But getting there meant exposing themselves to the machine gun nest. "Luna, I need you to do something for me," he whispered, knowing she couldn't understand the words but hoping she'd catch his intent. "I need you to show me the way you'd go." "Show me." He set her down carefully, pointing toward the ravine. To his amazement, Luna began moving through the undergrowth with the fluid grace only a wild predator possessed, instinctively finding the roots that offered maximum concealment. She would pause, look back at him, then continue a 4-legged scout, leading him through terrain that would have taken him precious minutes to analyze. "Martinez," Joseph called out, "follow my tracers. I found us a path." The next few minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. Joseph laid down covering fire while his squad mates moved in pairs toward the ravine, using the route Luna had shown them. The little leopard stayed close, her wild instincts somehow understanding that Joseph's survival meant her own. But as they reached the relative safety of the depression, Joseph heard a sound that made his blood freeze. Luna's scream of pain. She'd been hit. The cub lay on her side, breathing hard, a spreading dark stain matting the golden fur of her hindquarters. Her eyes found his, wide with pain and confusion, and Joseph felt something break inside his chest. "No, no, no," he whispered, dropping his rifle and pulling her into his arms. "Come on, girl. Stay with me." "White Horse, We gotta move. Martinez was shouting. Charlie's regrouping. But Joseph couldn't move. This creature, this wild thing that had saved his squad by showing them the safe path, was dying in his arms because she'd trusted him, because she'd stayed close when every instinct should have told her to run. Luna's breathing was growing shallow. She looked up at him with those intelligent dark eyes, and Joseph saw something there that nearly destroyed him forgiveness. She wasn't angry about the pain, wasn't blaming him for bringing her into this hell. She was simply trusting him to make it right. "I got you," he murmured, tearing his shirt to make bandages. "I got you, girl. You saved us. Now I'm going to save you." The wound was bad, a through and through that had nicked something vital. Joseph's field medic training kicked in as he worked to stop the bleeding, but he could feel Luna growing weaker with each passing second. "Sarge, I need to get her to the aid station," Joseph called out, his voice rough with emotion. "Son, we're in the middle of a goddamn war zone, that animal just saved 8 American lives." Joseph cut him off, his Cherokee temper flaring. "She let us out of that kill zone when we couldn't see the way ourselves. I'm not leaving her to die." Martinez's weathered face softened as he looked at the bleeding cub in Joseph's arms. "Ah, hell, Jackson. Williams, give White Horse cover. We're getting his cat to safety." The journey back to their base was a nightmare of forced marches and hidden movement, always staying one step ahead of enemy patrols. Luna drifted in and out of consciousness, but whenever Joseph thought he'd lost her, she'd open those dark eyes and look at him with complete trust. At the aid station, Doc Patterson, a gruff medic from Alabama who'd seen too much death, took one look at Luna and shook his head. "Private, I'm a combat medic, not a veterinarian." "Please, Doc, she saved my squad." Patterson studied Joseph's face, saw something there that made him sigh and reach for his medical bag. "Well, hell. Anatomy's anatomy, I guess. Let's see what we can do." For the next hour, Joseph held Luna while Doc Patterson worked to repair the damage. The cub's breathing stabilized. The bleeding stopped, but she remained unconscious, her small body fighting for life. "Best I can do, son," Doc said finally. "Rest is up to her and the good Lord." Joseph sat vigil through the night. Luna curled in his lap, his hand stroking her golden fur. He told her stories about the mountains back home, about his grandfather's teachings, about the Cherokee belief that all creatures were connected in the great web of life. As dawn broke over the jungle, Luna opened her eyes and pressed her head against his hand. She was going to live. But Joseph knew, with the certainty that comes from looking death in the face, that this bond between them had become something deeper than friendship. She had risked everything to save him and his men. Now he would do whatever it took to protect her, no matter what regulations said, no matter what his superiors thought. "You're family now," he whispered to her in Cherokee. "And family looks after family." Sarah discovered the truth the way most family secrets reveal themselves by accident, in a moment when grief makes people careless with their hiding places. She'd been searching for Joseph's insurance papers in his old roll-top desk when her fingers found the hidden compartment her grandfather had shown her as a child. Every Cherokee keeps some things sacred and private, he'd told her then, his weathered hands guiding hers to the secret spring mechanism. "Someday, you might need to know what I've kept safe." That someday had arrived with Little Thunder's medical crisis. The vet bills were mounting, and Sarah needed to understand her grandfather's financial situation. What she found instead changed everything she thought she knew about her family. The manila envelope was thick with documents, photographs, and what appeared to be a journal written in her grandfather's careful script. The first photograph made her hand shake a young Joseph in military fatigues, holding a golden leopard cub with intelligent dark eyes. "Luna," she breathed, reading the notation on the back. "Vietnam, 1972. With trembling fingers, she opened the journal to the first entry. November 15th, 1972. Found her today, wounded and alone after the bombing. Something about this little one reminds me of the stories grandfather told about spirit animals. She looks at me like she sees into my soul." Sarah sank into Joseph's old leather chair, the same one where he'd told her bedtime stories about Cherokee legends and talking animals. Those hadn't been just stories, she realized. They'd been preparation. December 3rd, 1972. Luna saved our patrol today. Led us through an ambush when we couldn't see the way out. Got herself shot protecting us. Doc says she'll live, but I made her a promise while she was fighting for her life. I'll always protect her family. A Cherokee keeps his word. Page after page revealed a story that defied everything Sarah thought she knew about wildlife behavior, about her grandfather's past, about the very cabin where she now lived. Joseph had somehow managed to bring Luna back to Tennessee when his tour ended, had created a sanctuary for her in these very mountains. March 1974. Luna's pregnant. Never thought I'd see the day. She's chosen a den site near the old Cherokee burial ground, like she knows this land is sacred. Makes me wonder if the spirits guided her here. May 1974. Luna had her cub today, only one, but healthy and strong, a female with Luna's intelligence and her mother's beauty. I'm calling her Spirit, because that's what she is, the bridge between Luna's world and mine. Sarah's breath caught. Spirit. The same name she'd instinctively given to the bobcat mother on her porch. How had she known July 1976? Luna's getting old, but Spirit's thriving. She's more cautious than her mother, won't come as close to the cabin, but she watches from the tree line. Sometimes I catch her eyes in the twilight, and I swear she remembers the promise I made to her mother. October 1978. Lost Luna today. Found her by the creek where she used to drink. Peaceful as if she just laid down for a nap. Spirit came to the burial. Sat vigil all night while I dug the grave. When I was done, she looked at me once, long and steady, then disappeared into the woods. But I know she'll be back. The promise passes to the next generation now. Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks, understanding beginning to dawn. The food Joseph had always set out for the raccoons. The way he always seemed to know when storms were coming, when the wildlife was restless. The inexplicable maintenance costs for the property that had always seemed too high for a simple mountain cabin. She flipped through decades of entries, watching the pattern emerge. Joseph had maintained his covenant with Luna's descendants through Spirit, and then Spirit's cubs, creating a multi-generational bond that had lasted 50 years. March 1995. Spirit's granddaughter had cubs this spring, 3 of them, healthy and wild as they should be. But there's something about the smallest one, a female with Luna's eyes. She watches me the way her great-grandmother did, like she's measuring my soul. June 2010. Sarah graduated from college today. Wish I could tell her about the family she doesn't know she has. But some knowledge comes when it's needed, not when it's wanted. She'll understand when the time comes. November 2020. The latest generation has moved closer to the cabin. Climate change is pushing them into smaller territories, and the developers are circling like vultures. I'm getting too old to be their guardian much longer. Hope Sarah will see what needs to be done when I'm gone. The final entry was dated just 3 months ago. August 2024. Something's wrong with the water. Found dead fish in the creek, and the deer won't drink from the lower pools. That new plant upstream Blackstone Industries, they're dumping something they shouldn't be. Spirit knows. She brought her newest cub closer to the cabin yesterday, like she's preparing for something. The promise I made to Luna might be tested one more time. Sarah set the journal down with shaking hands. Everything made sense now. Spirit's unprecedented trust, her willingness to bring Little Thunder to a human dwelling, the way she'd seemed to expect Sarah to help. This wasn't random animal behavior. This was a 50-year-old covenant coming due. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez. Lab results back. Little Thunder has acute organophosphate poisoning, consistent with illegal pesticide dumping. You need to see this. The attached report made Sarah's stomach clench. The levels of toxins in Little Thunder's blood were near fatal, and the compounds matched industrial pesticides that had been banned for agricultural use but were still legal for certain manufacturing processes. Sarah grabbed her car keys and headed for the door, but stopped when she saw Spirit still maintaining her vigil on the porch. The bobcat's amber eyes met hers through the window, and Sarah felt the weight of generations settling on her shoulders. I understand now, she said softly. Granddad made you a promise, and now it's mine to keep. Spirit's ears twitched, and Sarah could have sworn she saw acknowledgment in those intelligent eyes. At Dr. Martinez's clinic, the evidence was undeniable. These toxin levels didn't come from normal environmental exposure, Elena explained, pointing to the lab report. This kitten ingested a concentrated dose of industrial chemicals, probably from drinking contaminated water. How long before other animals start showing symptoms? If the source isn't contained, we could be looking at a die-off that affects the entire watershed within months. Sarah stared at the report, her grandfather's words echoing in her mind. A Cherokee keeps his word. The promise he'd made to Luna in a Vietnamese jungle had become her inheritance, and Little Thunder's poisoning was just the beginning. Elena, I need you to document everything. Blood work, toxin levels, probable source, all of it. Sarah, what are you thinking? I'm thinking Blackstone Industries is about to learn what it means to poison a Cherokee's family. She drove home through the mountain twilight, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. When she pulled into her driveway, Spirit was still there, silhouetted against the porch light like a guardian spirit. Sarah sat in her truck for a moment, looking at the wild creature who had trusted her with the most precious thing in her world. Granddad kept his promise for 50 years, she said aloud. Now it's my turn, as if she'd understood. Spirit rose and padded to the truck window, pressing her nose against the glass. For a moment, human and bobcat looked at each other across the ancient divide between species, united by a bond that transcended blood and time. The war for the mountain was about to begin. The confrontation began with a knock on Sarah's door at 7 a.m. delivered by two men in expensive suits who looked as out of place in the Tennessee mountains as penguins in a desert. "Miss Whitehorse, I'm Dale Brennan, legal counsel for Blackstone Industries. This is my colleague, Mr. Harrison from our Environmental Compliance Department." Sarah opened the door just wide enough to see them clearly, keeping her body positioned to block their view into the cabin where Little Thunder's recovery supplies were scattered across her kitchen table. "Gentlemen? Little early for a social call, isn't it?" Brennan's smile was the practiced kind that never reached the eyes. "We understand you've been making some serious allegations about our facility's environmental practices. We'd like to clear up any misunderstandings before they escalate unnecessarily." "I haven't made any allegations," Sarah replied carefully. "I've simply been treating a poisoned animal and having the toxins analyzed." "Facts tend to speak for themselves." Harrison stepped forward, his clipboard thick with official-looking documents. "Miss Whitehorse, we're also here regarding reports that you're harboring protected wildlife without proper permits, specifically a bobcat and her offspring." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. Through the window behind the men, she could see Spirit pacing restlessly at the forest edge, clearly agitated by the presence of strangers. "I'm not harboring anything. This is a wildlife rehabilitation situation. Without proper licensing," Brennan's tone sharpened, "that's a federal offense, Miss Whitehorse, punishable by substantial fines and possible imprisonment. It's also a federal offense to illegally dump industrial chemicals into protected watersheds." Sarah shot back, "Funny how that works." The two men exchanged glances. Harrison consulted his clipboard again. "Miss Whitehorse, we're prepared to offer you a generous settlement, enough to relocate anywhere you'd like. Pursue your photography career without the financial pressures of maintaining this remote property. In exchange for your silence regarding these unfounded environmental concerns, and your cooperation in resolving the wildlife situation according to proper legal channels." Sarah felt something cold and familiar settle in her chest, the same feeling she'd had as a child when bullies cornered smaller kids on the playground. Her grandfather had taught her there were two kinds of people in the world, those who protected the weak and those who preyed on them. "How much?" she asked quietly. Brennan's smile widened. $200,000. Cash. You could be packed and gone by the weekend. And the Bobcat family will be relocated to an appropriate facility by licensed wildlife management professionals. Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering their offer. Behind the men, she noticed a black SUV parked at the end of her driveway, engine running. Two more figures sat inside security, most likely. "That's a generous offer," she said finally. "Mind if I ask what happens if I refuse?" Harrison's expression hardened. "Miss Whitehorse, Blackstone Industries employs over 300 people in this county. We contribute millions to the local economy. A single individual making unfounded accusations could jeopardize all of that. People might lose their jobs," Brennan added. "Families might suffer, all because someone chose to prioritize animals over human welfare." The threat was crystal clear, wrapped in corporate doublespeak but unmistakable in its intent. Sarah thought of her neighbors, good people who'd struggled economically for years before Blackstone arrived. The company was counting on her unwillingness to hurt innocent families. "I need time to think about this," she said. "Of course." "But Miss Whitehorse—" Brennan's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Wildlife violations are serious business. Game wardens have broad authority to search properties, confiscate animals, press charges. It would be unfortunate if an anonymous tip led to an investigation." After they left, Sarah sat on her porch steps, hands shaking with rage and fear. Spirit emerged from the tree line, approaching closer than she ever had before, those amber eyes seeming to read Sarah's distress. "They want me to choose," Sarah told her. "Your family's safety or my neighbors' livelihoods." Her phone rang. "Dr." Martinez's voice was tight with urgency. "Sarah, you need to get down here immediately. Little Thunder's taken a turn for the worse." The drive to the clinic was a blur of mountain curves and mounting dread. Sarah found Elena bent over Little Thunder's small form, an IV line running into his tiny leg. "His kidney function is deteriorating," Elena explained without preamble. "The toxin levels were higher than we initially thought. He needs dialysis or he's not going to make it." "Can you do that here?" "Not for a bobcat. The nearest facility that could handle this is the University Veterinary Hospital in Knoxville, 3 hours away, and it'll cost a fortune." Sarah stared at Little Thunder's labored breathing, remembering her grandfather's journal entries about promises kept across generations. "How much?" "Conservative estimate 15,000. Maybe more if complications arise." Sarah's photography business was barely breaking even. Her savings account couldn't cover half that amount. And now Blackstone was offering her exactly what she needed, but at a price she couldn't stomach. "There's something else," Elena continued. "I've been making calls to other vets in the region. 3 reported similar cases in the past month: a fox, 2 raccoons, and a young bear cub. All showed the same toxin profile." "Jesus, how many animals are we talking about?" "Potentially hundreds. Sarah, this isn't just about Little Thunder anymore. If Blackstone is systematically poisoning the watershed, we're looking at an ecological disaster." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Offer expires at midnight. Choose wisely." She showed the message to Elena, whose face darkened. "They're threatening you. Worse, they're threatening my family." Sarah gestured toward Little Thunder. "All of them." That evening, Sarah sat in her grandfather's chair, surrounded by 50 years of journal entries that chronicled the bond between her family and Spirit's lineage. Outside, Spirit maintained her vigil, occasionally approaching the window to check on the cabin's interior. At 11:30, Sarah made her decision. She called the number Brennan had left. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. "Mr. Brennan, this is Sarah Whitehorse. I've made my decision about your offer." "Excellent. I'll have the paperwork drawn up immediately." "I'm refusing." Silence stretched across the line. When Brennan spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of civility. "Miss Whitehorse, I strongly advise you to reconsider. The consequences of poisoning protected wildlife include federal prosecution under the Endangered Species Act." Sarah interrupted. "The consequences of illegal dumping include massive EPA fines and criminal charges. The consequences of threatening a Cherokee woman on her ancestral land." She paused, letting her grandfather's steel enter her voice. "Well, Mr. Brennan, I guess we're both about to find out." She hung up and immediately called the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation's emergency hotline. "This is Sarah Whitehorse in Sevier County. I need to report an environmental crime in progress." Through her window, Spirit sat silhouetted against the starlight, amber eyes fixed on the cabin. Sarah touched her grandfather's journal, feeling the weight of promises made and kept across 2 generations. "The war starts now, girl," she whispered. "But we're not fighting it alone. As if she'd understood, spirit rose and melted back into the forest darkness. But Sarah knew she hadn't gone far. The guardian was simply taking her position for the battle ahead. At exactly midnight, Sarah's phone rang. When she answered, there was only breathing on the other end, then a single sentence, "You should have taken the money." The line went dead. But Sarah wasn't afraid. She was a white horse, a Cherokee, and the inheritor of a 50-year covenant. Blackstone Industries was about to learn what happened when you threatened a mountain woman's family. All of them. The end came for Luna on a Tuesday morning when the monsoon rains had finally stopped, and shafts of golden sunlight pierced the jungle canopy like cathedral light. Joseph found her by their favorite spot near the stream, where she'd taught him to read the forest's moods, and he'd shared stories of the Tennessee mountains in a mixture of English and Cherokee. She was lying on her side, breathing shallow and labored, her once magnificent golden coat now dull with age and pain. At 8 years old, Luna had lived longer than most leopards in the wild, but the old wound from the ambush had never fully healed, and the constant stress of war had taken its toll on her body. "Hey there, beautiful girl," Joseph whispered, settling beside her on the mossy ground. Luna's dark eyes opened at the sound of his voice, and she managed to lift her head enough to press it against his hand. Joseph had known this day was coming. Over the past month, Luna had been moving slower, eating less, spending more time resting in the shade of their shared shelter. The base medic had warned him that wild animals often hid their pain until the very end, and Luna was no exception. "Doc says you're carrying cubs," Joseph murmured, his voice thick with emotion as he felt the subtle movement in her swollen belly. "Jesus, Luna, why didn't you tell me sooner?" But even as he said it, Joseph understood. Luna had been waiting, using the last of her strength to ensure her offspring had the best chance of survival. She'd chosen this spot near the stream where water was clean, in sight of the base where Joseph could find her, close enough to their shelter that her cubs would be born in familiar territory. Luna made a soft sound, somewhere between a purr and a sigh, and Joseph felt tears streaming down his face. "I know, girl. I know you're tired." The contractions began an hour later. Joseph had assisted with animal births before his grandfather had taught him the old ways of reading nature's rhythms and helping when help was needed. But this was different. This was Luna, and she was dying even as she fought to bring new life into the world. "Come on, Mama," he whispered, supporting her head as she labored. "You can do this. You're the strongest thing I've ever known." The first cub was stillborn, a tiny, perfect replica of Luna that never drew breath. Joseph wrapped the small body in his spare shirt, his heart breaking for the life that might have been. But the second cub came into the world with a fierce cry that echoed through the jungle, announcing her presence with the kind of defiant spirit that made Joseph's chest swell with pride. She was smaller than her sibling, golden like her mother, but with distinctive markings that seemed to catch and hold the filtered sunlight. "Well, I'll be damned," Joseph breathed, watching as Luna instinctively began cleaning her daughter. "Look at you, little one." For a few precious hours, Luna rallied. She nursed her cub, purring with a contentment Joseph hadn't heard in months. The kitten was strong, latching on immediately and feeding with the determined hunger of a survivor. "She's got your spirit," Joseph told Luna, stroking the big cat's head as she tended to her baby. "And your eyes. Look at those eyes, Mama." But as the afternoon wore on, Luna grew weaker. She'd given everything she had to bring her daughter safely into the world, and there was nothing left for her own survival. As the sun began to set, painting the jungle in shades of gold and crimson, Luna looked at Joseph with an expression he would remember for the rest of his life. It was gratitude, love, and something else, a plea that transcended species and spoke directly to his heart. "I understand," he whispered, gathering the tiny cub in his hands as Luna's breathing grew more labored. "I promise, girl. I'll protect her. I'll protect her family. A Cherokee keeps his word." Luna's eyes drifted closed, and her breathing stopped so peacefully that for a moment Joseph thought she was simply sleeping. But when he pressed his ear to her chest, there was only silence. The kitten in his hands mewed softly, already missing her mother's warmth. "Spirit," Joseph said aloud, the name coming to him as naturally as breathing. "That's what you are, little one. Your mama's spirit, living on." The next few days were a blur of grief, responsibility, and desperate improvisation. Joseph buried Luna beside the stream where she'd loved to drink, marking her grave with stones arranged in the Cherokee pattern his grandfather had taught him for honoring the spirits of honored animals. Spirit required feeding every 2 hours, and Joseph quickly learned to mix condensed milk with water and administer it through a makeshift nursing bottle fashioned from medical supplies. The base commander, Colonel Harris, had been surprisingly understanding when Joseph explained the situation. "Son, you saved my patrol leader's life 6 months ago," Harris had said gruffly. "Far as I'm concerned, you've earned the right to raise a damn circus elephant if it suits you." But Joseph knew his time in Vietnam was running short. His tour was scheduled to end in 3 months, and he faced an impossible choice: leave Spirit to fend for herself in the jungle, or find a way to bring her home to Tennessee. The decision was made for him when Spirit got sick. At 6 weeks old, she developed a respiratory infection that left her listless and barely breathing. The base medic did what he could, but his resources were limited, and his expertise was with human patients. "She's not going to make it without proper veterinary care," Doc Patterson told Joseph honestly. "And that's not something we can provide here." That night, Joseph sat with Spirit curled against his chest, feeling her tiny heart beating rapidly against his hand. He thought about Luna's final look, about the promise he'd made, about the Cherokee belief that some bonds transcended death itself. "I'm getting you out of here, little one," he whispered. "Don't know how yet, but I'm getting you home." The solution came from an unexpected source, Chaplain Rodriguez, a Catholic priest from New Mexico who'd been ministering to the troops for 2 tours. "Son, I've seen men carry stranger things home from war," the chaplain said when Joseph approached him for advice. "Guilt, nightmares, pieces of shrapnel that will never heal. You want to carry hope and love instead? I'll help you figure out how." It took weeks of planning, paperwork, and creative interpretation of military regulations, but eventually they found a path. Spirit would travel as Joseph's emotional support animal, a concept that was just beginning to gain recognition in military psychology circles. The bonds formed in combat can take many forms, Colonel Harris wrote in his official recommendation. Private Whitehorse has demonstrated exceptional service under fire, and his request represents a unique form of psychological healing that may benefit not only him, but our understanding of combat stress recovery. The journey home was harrowing. Spirit, now 3 months old and still fragile, had to be sedated for most of the 20-hour flight. Joseph barely slept, checking her breathing every few minutes and praying to every deity he could remember from his grandfather's teachings. When they finally landed at McGee-Tyson Airport outside Knoxville, Joseph felt like he was carrying Luna's spirit home to the mountains where she belonged. His grandfather, Thomas Whitehorse, was waiting at the gate with a knowing smile and eyes that seemed to see straight through to Joseph's soul. "Grandson," the old man said simply, "I see you've brought family home with you." Joseph handed him the pet carrier containing Spirit, who was just beginning to wake up from her sedation. "Grandfather, meet Spirit. She's the reason I'm still alive." Thomas peered into the carrier at the golden kitten with her distinctive markings and intelligent dark eyes. When Spirit looked back at him, the old man's weathered face broke into a grin. "Cherokee legend says some spirits choose their own guardians," Thomas said quietly. "Looks like this one chose well." As they drove through the Tennessee mountains toward the family land, Joseph told his grandfather about Luna, about the promise he'd made, about the bond that had sustained him through the darkest days of war. "Love doesn't die, grandson," Thomas said when the story was finished. "It just changes form. That mama cat's love is living on in this little one, and your love is going to keep it alive." Spirit stirred in her carrier, making the soft trilling sound that would become her signature call. Through the car window, the ancient mountains of Cherokee homeland rose against the sky like sleeping giants. Joseph was home. And so was Luna's daughter. The promise made in a Vietnamese jungle would be kept in Tennessee soil across generations yet to come. The call came at 4 a.m, jarring Sarah from restless sleep filled with dreams of amber eyes and distant thunder. "Doctor?" Martinez's voice was tight with exhaustion and something else urgency that made Sarah's stomach clench with dread. "Sarah, you need to get down here now. Little Thunder's crashing, and there's something else. Something you need to see." Sarah threw on clothes and drove through the pre-dawn darkness, her grandfather's journal clutched in one hand while she steered with the other. The mountain roads were treacherous in the dark, but she'd driven them 1,000 times, guided by instincts inherited from generations of Cherokee who'd traveled these paths by starlight. At the clinic, she found Elena bent over Little Thunder's still form, working frantically to stabilize his vital signs. The kitten's breathing was so shallow it was barely visible, and his tiny body felt cold to the touch when Sarah placed her hand on his chest. "The toxin levels spiked overnight," Elena explained without looking up from her instruments. "His kidneys are shutting down. We've got maybe 6 hours before." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "What else?" Sarah asked, remembering Elena's words on the phone. "You said there was something else I needed to see." Elena straightened, her face grim. "I've been getting calls all night. Every vet within 100 miles has reported similar cases in the past 48 hours. Foxes, raccoons, even a young black bear, all with identical toxin profiles. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. How many? 17 confirmed deaths so far. And Sarah, the pattern of contamination, it's not random. It's following the watershed downstream from Blackstone Industries. Before Sarah could respond, the clinic door burst open. Joseph Whitehorse stood in the doorway, his face pale and drawn, but his eyes blazing with the kind of determination Sarah remembered from her childhood when he'd faced down schoolyard bullies or corrupt officials trying to cheat Cherokee families out of their land rights. "Granddad, what are you doing here? You should be resting." "Heard about the little one?" Joseph said simply, moving to Little Thunder's side with the careful gait of a man whose body was failing but whose spirit remained unbroken. "And it's time you knew the whole truth." Sarah watched in amazement as her grandfather gently placed his weathered hand on Little Thunder's small head. The kitten's breathing seemed to steady slightly at the touch, as if some ancient recognition passed between them. "The truth about what?" Joseph reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope different from the one Sarah had found in his desk, older and more worn. "The truth about why Spirit brought her baby to you. The truth about Blackstone Industries. And the truth about what I've been hiding from you for the past 6 months." With shaking hands, he opened the envelope and spread its contents across Elena's examination table. Medical reports, X-rays, and laboratory results that made Sarah's knees go weak. "You're sick," she whispered, reading the oncology reports with growing horror. "Granddad, you're dying." "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer," Joseph confirmed matter-of-factly. "Been fighting it for 8 months now. Doc gives me maybe 6 weeks, probably less." Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed you focused on your life, not my death. And because I knew this day would come." He gestured toward Little Thunder. "Spirit's been bringing her family closer to the cabin for months, like she knows I won't be around much longer to protect them." Elena had been studying the medical reports while they talked. "Joseph, these test results, some of these symptoms match what we're seeing in the poisoned wildlife. Nausea, kidney function decline, neurological effects." Joseph nodded grimly. "Been drinking from the same creek as the animals. Took me a while to put it together, but the timeline matches. My symptoms got worse right after Blackstone started operations 6 months ago." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "They didn't just poison the wildlife, they poisoned you. And probably half the people in the county who depend on well water that connects to the same underground system," Joseph added. "Blackstone's been dumping industrial waste into the groundwater, hoping nobody would notice until they'd made their money and moved on." Sarah sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what her grandfather was revealing. The threats, the legal pressure, they know you're dying. They're waiting for you to die so the opposition goes away. "That's where they made their mistake," Joseph said, his voice gaining strength. "They assumed a dying old man wouldn't be willing to spend his last weeks fighting a war he might not live to see won." He pulled another document from the envelope, a legal filing that made Sarah's eyes widen. "Granddad, what is this? Federal lawsuit against Blackstone Industries. Environmental crimes, public endangerment, violation of the Safe Drinking Water Act, and about 12 other charges that'll put their executives in federal prison if we can prove them." Joseph's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a chess player who'd just revealed a winning strategy. "Been working with environmental lawyers for 3 months, building an airtight case. But the evidence is right here." Joseph tapped Little Thunder's still form. Every poisoned animal, every sick resident, every contaminated water sample. They gave us all the evidence we need by trying to cover up their crimes. Elena had been quietly working while they talked, and now she looked up with something like hope in her eyes. His vitals are stabilizing, whatever you did. Joseph, it's helping. Sarah stared at her grandfather in amazement. How long have you been planning this? Since the day I found out I was dying. Figured if I was going out, I might as well take some corporate criminals with me. Joseph managed a weak smile. Besides, I made a promise to Luna 50 years ago. Cherokee keeps his word, even from the grave. Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Brennan's number, and she answered on speaker. Miss Whitehorse, I trust you've had time to reconsider our generous offer. Mr. Brennan, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. I have reconsidered. In fact, I'd like to make you a counteroffer. I'm listening. Federal agents will be at your facility within the hour with search warrants and arrest warrants. You can surrender peacefully and cooperate with the investigation, or you can resist and face additional charges of obstruction of justice. The silence on the other end stretched for long seconds. When Brennan spoke again, his corporate confidence had evaporated. You're bluffing. Am I? Check your parking lot? Through the clinic's window, Sarah could see the flashing lights of federal vehicles surrounding the Blackstone facility in the distance. The FBI Environmental Crimes Unit had moved faster than even Joseph had expected. You have 30 minutes to evacuate all personnel from the plant, Sarah continued. After that, it becomes a federal crime scene. Brennan's voice turned desperate. Miss Whitehorse, you don't understand the economic implications. I understand that you poisoned my grandfather and tried to murder a Cherokee's family. Sarah cut him off. Now you get to explain that to a federal judge. She hung up and turned to Joseph, who was watching the federal operation through the window with deep satisfaction. How did you coordinate all this without me knowing? Old man's got to have some secrets, Joseph said with a weak laugh. Besides, I had help, as if summoned by his words. The clinic door opened again. A tall man in his 50s entered, wearing an expensive suit but with the weathered hands and careful eyes of someone who'd grown up working the land. Sarah, Joseph said quietly, I'd like you to meet Marcus Thompson, your cousin. Sarah's world tilted again. My what? Marcus stepped forward, his face a mixture of shame and determination. I'm Joseph's son, the one who ran away 30 years ago and never looked back. He paused, struggling with emotions Sarah could see warring across his features. I'm also the principal owner of Blackstone Industries. The revelation hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. You're your own company. I came here to make money and move on, Marcus said, his voice thick with regret. I didn't know about Dad's illness. I didn't know about the environmental damage. And I sure as hell didn't know my own executives were threatening Cherokee families. Joseph looked at his estranged son with eyes that held forgiveness instead of anger. Some things are more important than old grudges. Son, family is family. Marcus turned to Little Thunder, still fighting for life on the examination table. What do you need money for treatment? Transport to specialists. Whatever it takes. What we need, Sarah said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn, is for you to testify against your own executives, to help us prove what they've been doing. Marcus nodded without hesitation. I've already turned over all our internal communications to the FBI. Emails, memos, chemical disposal records, everything. Outside, the federal operation was in full swing. Agents in hazmat suits were securing evidence while others led Brennan and his associates away in handcuffs. Joseph reached for Little Thunder one more time, his touch gentle on the kitten's small head. Your mama's watching over you, little one, and now your human family's going to make sure this never happens to anyone else. As if he'd heard, Little Thunder opened his eyes for the first time in hours, amber gaze focusing on Joseph's weathered face. The fight for the mountain was far from over, but the tide had turned. 6 months later, Sarah sat on her grandfather's porch watching Little Thunder stalk a grasshopper through the garden she'd planted in Joseph's memory. The young bobcat had grown into a magnificent animal, his spots darkening to rich amber against golden fur that caught the Tennessee sunlight like liquid fire. His amber eyes held the same intelligence that had marked his mother, his grandmother, and all the generations stretching back to Luna. The porch where Spirit had first brought her dying kitten was now a place of healing. Little Thunder was thriving. The creek ran clean again, and the wildlife had returned to the mountain in numbers Sarah hadn't seen since childhood. But the chair where Joseph used to sit remained empty, and would always remain so. The old Cherokee way says no one really dies as long as someone remembers their stories, Sarah murmured, touching the leather journal that had become her most treasured possession. Well, Granddad, your story's going to be remembered for a long time. The Joseph Whitehorse Environmental Foundation had grown beyond anything Sarah could have imagined. Marcus Thompson, who had legally changed his name back to Marcus Whitehorse after reconciling with his father before Joseph's death, had donated the entire Blackstone facility to the foundation, transforming it into a wildlife rehabilitation center and environmental research station. The legal victory had been complete. Brennan and 3 other executives were serving federal prison sentences for environmental crimes. The EPA had declared the Blackstone site a Superfund cleanup priority, and the company's insurance settlements had provided funding for both environmental restoration and medical treatment for affected residents. But the real victory was quieter, more personal. Spirit emerged from the forest edge, padding silently across the yard with the grace that had marked her lineage for 50 years. At 4 years old, she was in her prime, a successful mother who had raised 3 litters in the safety Joseph's promise had provided. She no longer approached the cabin directly, but she was a constant presence, a guardian watching over the land her family had protected for 2 generations. She knows, Dr. Martinez had said during her last visit. Somehow, she understands that you're carrying on Joseph's work. Sarah believed it. The bond between the Whitehorse family and Spirit's bloodline had transcended the death of its architect. If anything, it had grown stronger. Little Thunder, now old enough to hunt on his own, but still young enough to play, had become a bridge between worlds. He was wild enough to survive independently, but tame enough to serve as an ambassador for his species. School groups came weekly to observe him through the specially designed viewing areas Marcus had funded, learning about wildlife conservation and the delicate balance between human development and environmental protection. He's teaching them, Sarah often told visitors, teaching them that we're all connected predator and prey, human and animal, mountain and valley, Everything depends on everything else. The sound of an approaching vehicle broke her reverie. A familiar white pickup truck wound up the gravel drive, followed by a smaller car Sarah didn't recognize. Dr. Martinez climbed out of the truck, but the second vehicle yielded a surprise, an elderly Cherokee woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of mountains. "Sarah," Elena called, "I'd like you to meet someone special. This is Mary Lightfoot, Joseph's cousin from the reservation." Mary approached with the measured gait of someone who had seen 90 summers, but carried herself with dignity that spoke of deep roots and deeper knowledge. When she reached the porch, Little Thunder immediately approached her, showing none of the caution he displayed around most strangers. "So," Mary said, her voice carrying the musical cadence of someone who spoke Cherokee as often as English. "This is Luna's great-grandson." Sarah's breath caught. "You knew Luna." Mary's weathered face creased into a smile. "Child, I knew the promise your grandfather made before he ever set foot in that jungle. The spirits told us he would find his calling across the ocean, but they also told us he would bring it home." She knelt slowly, and Little Thunder approached without hesitation, pressing his head against her outstretched hand. "The old stories say some bonds are written in the stars before the people involved are even born. Joseph and Luna, you and Spirit, these connections span lifetimes." "I don't understand." Mary gestured toward the forest where Spirit watched from the shadows. "In Cherokee tradition, we believe that guardian spirits sometimes take physical form to protect the people they're meant to serve. Joseph saved Luna in that war, but Luna saved him first, saved his heart, his purpose, his connection to the sacred balance of all living things." She stood slowly, her eyes meeting Sarah's with an intensity that made the younger woman's pulse quicken. "The foundation you've built, the work you're doing, this is why the spirits brought Luna and Joseph together 50 years ago. They could see what was coming, the choices that would need to be made." Elena had been documenting Little Thunder's response to Mary's presence, and now she looked up from her notebook with amazement. "His stress markers are completely normal. No elevated heart rate, no fight-or-flight response. It's like he recognizes her." "He does," Mary said simply. "Blood recognizes blood. Spirit recognizes spirit. This little one carries Luna's wisdom, Joseph's protection, and the prayers of 7 generations of Cherokee who understood that the land and its creatures are not separate things, but one living whole." As if to demonstrate Mary's words, Spirit emerged fully from the forest, approaching closer to the cabin than Sarah had ever seen her come. The big cat settled in the dappled shade of an oak tree, amber eyes fixed on Mary with something that looked remarkably like respect. "There's something else," Mary continued, reaching into the beaded bag she carried. "Something Joseph asked me to give you when the time was right." She withdrew a small bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. Inside, Sarah found a carved wooden pendant, a bobcat curled around a mountain, inlaid with turquoise that matched the color of Tennessee sky. "He made this during his last weeks," Mary explained. "Said it was for the guardian who would come after him, the one who would carry the promise into the future." Sarah fastened the pendant around her neck, feeling its weight settle against her heart like a blessing. "I'm not sure I'm worthy of this responsibility." "Worthiness isn't inherited, child. It's earned, and you've already proven yourself worthy." Mary gestured toward the thriving landscape around them, the clean creek, the returning wildlife, the research station that would protect this ecosystem for generations to come. Joseph's promise has become your mission, and your mission has become something larger than either of you could have imagined. As the afternoon sun slanted lower through the trees, Marcus arrived for their weekly foundation meeting. Sarah still marveled at the transformation in her cousin from the corporate executive who had fled Cherokee traditions to embrace mainstream American success, to the man who now split his time between environmental law and traditional craft work, learning the old ways from elders like Mary. "The State Environmental Department approved our proposal," he announced, his face bright with satisfaction. "We're getting formal designation as a Cherokee cultural and environmental preserve, federal protection, tribal sovereignty recognition, and guaranteed funding for the next 50 years. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "Granddad would be so proud." "He knows," Mary said with quiet certainty. "The spirits of the Cherokee dead don't rest until their work is finished. Joseph's spirit won't rest until this land is protected for 7 generations forward." As evening approached, Little Thunder and Spirit began their nightly ritual, a brief reunion at the forest edge where Mother acknowledged Son, where wild nature touched the civilized world without losing its essential character. Sarah had photographed this moment hundreds of times, but tonight she simply watched, absorbing the beauty of connection across species and generations. "You know," Elena said softly, "in all my years of wildlife medicine, I've never seen anything like this. The bond between your family and theirs, it's rewritten everything I thought I knew about human-animal relationships." "Maybe that's the point," Sarah replied, touching Joseph's pendant at her throat. "Maybe we're not supposed to understand everything with our minds. Maybe some truths can only be felt with our hearts." As the last light faded from the Tennessee sky, Spirit retreated to the forest depths, but Little Thunder remained near the cabin, wild enough to survive, tame enough to trust, young enough to carry the covenant forward into whatever challenges lay ahead. Sarah opened Joseph's journal one last time, reading words that had become her daily prayer. "A Cherokee keeps his word, and love doesn't die, it just changes form." Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, and Little Thunder answered with the soft chuff that had become his signature sound. The mountain settled into sleep, protected by promises kept across generations, sustained by love that transcended species and time. The covenant would continue, carried forward by those who understood that some bonds, once forged in trust and sealed with sacrifice, become eternal. In the distance, Sarah could hear the whisper of clean water flowing over ancient stones, carrying life to all who dwelt within the sacred balance. "Thank you, Granddad," she whispered to the star-filled sky, "for teaching me that family comes in all forms, and love comes in all species." From the forest, Spirit's amber eyes reflected starlight one final time before melting into the shadows, guardian and protected, wild and domestic, mountain and human, all part of one unbroken circle of care that would endure as long as the mountains themselves. Friends, there's something magical that happens when we open our hearts to the wild creatures who share this beautiful country with us. Just like Sarah and her grandfather Joseph discovered, the bonds we form with animals, whether it's the family dog who greets us at the door, or the wild bobcat who trusts us enough to bring her sick baby for help, these connections remind us what truly matters in life. In a world that often feels divided and uncertain, where families are scattered across states and technology can make us feel more isolated than connected, these stories of trust and loyalty across species lines touch something deep in our souls. They remind us of simpler times when neighbors helped neighbors, when a man's word was his bond, and when protecting the vulnerable, whether human or animal, was simply the right thing to do. Sarah's journey from grief to purpose, watching Little Thunder grow strong and healthy while honoring her grandfather's 50-year promise, shows us that love truly doesn't die. It just changes form. Every act of kindness we show, every creature we help, every promise we keep creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see, touching lives and hearts across generations, just like the Cherokee wisdom teaches us. Share with us. What animal has touched your heart and changed your perspective on life? Have you ever felt that special connection with a wild creature that seemed to understand you